Greetings to all the learners. I am Pallavi Tandon, Faculty of English at SRN International School, Jagatpura, Jaipur. I welcome you to the official YouTube channel of SRN International School. So today we will be learning about the famous poem by Shirley Toulson, A Photograph. The poem A Photograph is written by Shirley Toulson. In this poem, she recalls her mother and her memories while looking at the childhood photograph when her mother was 12 years old or so. She has been deceased 12 years ago and she cannot explain her grief on her mother's loss. The poem Photograph contrasts the eternal state of nature and the transitory state of human beings. The poet describes a photograph that captures interesting moments of her mother's childhood when she went for a sea holiday with her two girl cousins. The poet draws a contrast between the nature changing at a snail's pace and the fast-changing human life. The three stanzas of the poem depict three different stages of life, that is, early adolescence, adulthood, and death. The setting of the poem. The poem A Photograph is a tribute to poet's mother. Three stages of time span is focused. First, the poet's mother's enjoyment of sea holiday with her cousin. The second stage takes us 20 or 30 years later. The third stage, poet remembers her dead mother with heavy heart. Before we proceed towards paraphrasing, let us know about the poet. Shirley Toulson. She was born on 20th May 1924 in Henley-on-Thames, England. She died on 15th May 2014. She spent most of her life in Somerset. She was a highly regarded poet and an innovative writer about Britain's walks and traditions. She had a huge passion on writing and was greatly influenced by her father, who was a writer too. She took writing as career but also served as the editor for many magazines. Celtic Christianity influenced her greatly. The most of her major works like Celtic Alternative in 1987 and Celtic Year in 1993 were on that topic. Her famous works include Shadows, I and Orchid, published in 1960, The Fault, Dear Brutus, A Zodiac of Sonnets in 1972, The Companion, Guide to Devon in 1991. Now let us understand the poem with the help of paraphrasing. Line number 1 to 4 says, The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. So, in these lines, the poet describes a photograph that captures interesting memories of her mother's childhood when she went for a sea holiday with her two girl cousins. The poem begins when the poetess goes through her mother's photo that lay within the cardboard box. So the poetess portrays it as being vulnerable to forces of decay. In the photo, poetess' mother seen framed with her siblings, who are younger than her. Also, she highlights her mother's strength as she supports her young cousins. Both the cousins were holding mother's hand. Line number 5 to 9. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's. That was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. In the above lines, the poet describes how the photograph was clicked. Her mother's uncle took the photograph and told them to smile and pose. All three of them left their wet hair open and smiled at the camera. It is her mother, when she was 12 years old or so, Besides her, on both sides are her two cousins, Betty and Dolly, who are holding her hands and are younger than her. They went for paddling on a beach holiday. Her uncle took the photograph. Then, at that moment, the poet's attention is drawn towards his mother's face, which is described as sweet face. The photograph was taken long before the poet was born. The poet calls their feet terrible transient, as they were so young by then, and now they had grown older. On the other hand, the sea which touched their feet has changed less. Here poet contrasts the eternal state of nature and transitory state of human beings. So here are lines number 10 to 13. It says, some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, should say, and look how they dressed us for the beach, the sea holiday. So here in these lines, the poetess expresses that after 20-30 years later, her mother would have laughed at the photograph. She would make the poet look at the photograph and tell her how their parents would dress them up for the beach holiday. They would have planned to take a photograph beforehand. The beach holiday was her mother's favorite past memories, while her laugh was the poet's favorite memory. Both of them lost something which they cherished a lot and yet cannot live that moment again. Now we have line number 14 and 15. Now it says, was her past, mine is her laughter. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. So here, the poet recalls the sea holiday was her mother's favorite moment from the past. Both the women would think about those past memories, which they cannot live again. The poet imagines how her mother laughed at the photograph and felt saddened at the loss of her childhood joys, while the poet's much-loved moment from the past was her mother's laughter. The sea holiday was her mother's past at that time, while her mother's laughter is the poet's past. With great difficulty and at different period of time, both settled with their respective losses and the pain involved in recollecting the past. Line number 16 to 19. It says, now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there's nothing to say at all. It's silence silences. So here poet wants to tell us that her mother died 12 years ago, the same age her mother was in the photograph. Whenever the poet thinks of her mother's death, she cannot express the grief that she has from her mother's absence. Death has silenced her mother, which has also left her speechless. For the poet, the death of a mother brought great sadness and an acute sense of loss. The painful silence of the situation leaves her with no words to express her. Thus, the silence silences. Although the death or end makes things so quiet and empty, it creates a vacuum in the life. However, the poetess finds her mother died to be loud and inspiring, enough to pour her feelings out in the form of a tribute and poem. Thus, even though death finishes everything, but her mother death brings out a new response in her. Lastly, she accepts her resignation to the final silence of death. Hence, in a nutshell, the poetess wants to say that death is unavoidable, so embrace your life. Now let us proceed towards the poetic devices. The poetic devices used in the poem A Photograph are alliteration. In the phrases stood still to smile, or terribly transient, or in silent silences. Then we have transferred epithet in washed their terribly transient feet. We have oxymoron in labored ease. Now let us understand the philosophy of the poem A Photograph. So here in this poem, A Photograph, it's about impermanence of life. The poem also tells that a photograph is not just a positive print which is recorded by a camera. It is rather a captured moment which later becomes a beautiful memory. It holds those moments which might never get back. To encapsulate, poet has beautifully drawn a contrast between nature changing at snail's pace and the fast changing human life. I hope this subject video will help you in understanding the poem. I have tried to explain you in a better way. If you have found it helpful, kindly like, share and subscribe. Thank you.